It's so good to have you here again. And, I really feel like I was preparing for this conversation, thinking about religion so much. You talk about climate science is really climate religion. And I feel that so deeply because it always just comes back to this spiritual battle. I think we're in a battle of polytheism, and climate religion is one of the pantheon, and globalism is one, and gender is another, one world government. So I want to hear some good news out of our out of the EPA and how they are fighting this agenda, because it sounds like there's some happy things happening. We've got Lee Zeldin. Give me an update and let's chat about that.
Well, let's just give you the headline right now. And this may be hard for some people to believe who have been watching the Trump administration, but Lee Zeldin, I believe, is the most consequential Trump cabinet member thus far, 7-8 months into his presidency.
Wow.
And I will go even further and say that he's the most consequential EPA chief in the agency's history, going back to Richard Nixon when he started. And I used to work at the U.S. Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. I worked with Senator James Inhofe, and I worked with the Republicans on the committee. I was a speechwriter. I was a climate researcher. I did the 1,000 dissenting scientists report. We also had EPA chiefs come and testify, Bush administration, Obama administration. And I actually worked for Trump's first, the chief of staff of the Senate committee was actually Trump's second EPA chief. So I'm very familiar with all of the EPA team. And I got to, there is no one who's even approached what Lee Zeldin has accomplished. And I got to say this too. It wasn't like this was his issue. This wasn't his burning, lifelong quest of fighting, environmental regulations, climate change. He came into this and basically just, whoa, I didn't see it coming. I didn't know much about him, but I have been blown away. And if you don't mind me just speaking for a moment about Lee Zeldin.
No, go. I wanted you to go on about Lee Zeldin as well, because this is exciting.
Okay, well, I just had a lunch 2 weeks ago with top EPA officials, and I told them just what I told you. And of course, they were beaming with that information. And they said, Trump has actually said that Lee Zeldin is the most important cabinet member we have here, and as he talks about it. What Lee Zeldin has done, let's talk about the difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0. Now, it's going to sound like I'm full of Trump, but I guess I will. His first term fell short on climate, energy, and all these regulations and EPA. Why did it fall so short? One word. Well, I guess it's 3 words. Lack of permanence. And the reason it's so well this time is one word: permanence. What happened last time was the Trump EPA and the Trump administration in general, including the State Department, including their climate division that deals with the United Nations, decided not to go after this endangerment finding, which Obama started, regulating human breaths, carbon dioxide. We breathe it, inhale oxygen, we exhale CO2 as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. So Trump administration first term said, we're not going to, that's a bridge too far. They also said, we're not going to pull out of the UN climate process. We'll just pull out of that one treaty, right? That's what we'll do. Guess what? Within 3 to 6 months of President Biden being sworn in, Joe Biden, whatever, all of Trump's first term accomplishments were basically wiped out because there was no permanence. There was no long-term game. Now, that sounds pretty critical, but they've exceeded. Now, what
I
they've
said
done
the same thing about the whole administration.
The whole administration, yes. And that's why I think threatening to jail him and all the nonsense and the phony 2020 election, I think it really brought out a new Donald Trump and a new administration this time. Much, much better. Now, what they've done this time, and what Lee Zeldin, the first thing you'll notice is and I hate to say rhetoric, but the narrative control. Mm-hmm. It's a master narrative that, again, I never thought I would see from a New York congressman who'd never dealt with climate. I didn't see it coming. But what I mean by this is, my first book was The Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, and I did a book called Green Fraud, where the Green New Deal is worse. In both books, I criticized harshly the Trump administration, harshly meaning gently, because I was very supportive of what they were doing, but I was disappointed for not following up with the narrative. If you go back, his first EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, his second EPA chief, acting director, Andrew Wheeler, They were very cautious. Scott Pruitt was the Oklahoma Attorney General, much less cautious. He would challenge the UN. He would challenge some climate stuff, but the media would go after him. In fact, the reason he gently challenged the climate consensus, Scott Pruitt, and he was the administration, they ran him out of Washington on an ethics charge. And you know what it was? Oh, he and his wife got Airbnb at below market rate from someone. It was the most absurd stuff. One of the reasons was, and he was hounded in restaurants, is he gently pushed back on the UN climate narrative. Well, Andrew Wheeler didn't even push back at all. This is where they just accepted it, and they weren't going to challenge the premise, and they were going to do what they could, and within these little guardrails. Well, forward, Lee Zeldin comes in, starts calling it a religion, a scam, cult, a con. He calls the entire movement a sham. And he does it with glee. He does it with narrative and masterful control. They do it in EP press releases. He does it in media interviews. And unlike the first term, where both EPA chiefs were bashed in the media and they had a hard time, and you'd see them and they would be stressed out in interviews, every time you see Lee Zeldin, the more hostile, the more he's beaming and every minute of his job. And why is that? It's the same reason when I worked for Senator James Inhofe, he loved hostile interviews. Because when you are strong, when you are clear, when you master the narrative and you shove it back completely 180 degrees from everything that they've been trying to impose and box you in, and all the Trump first-termers went along with it, then you come across weak and you come vulnerable. Lee Zeldin has had great press. Even the New York Times, no one can touch him because he's in their face. He's closing EPA museums. He's going after the holy grail of the entire movement, which is the endangerment finding started by President Obama, which would then make it almost impossible for a future president, hold your ears, I know this is going to be a tough one, Elizabeth, a future potential president, AOC or Gavin Newsom, going to be able to just jump us back in to, gas-powered car bans based on the endangerment finding. And the second thing that Lee Zeldin is pushing, and this is beyond his agency too, the other parts of the Trump administration, they want to withdraw us from the 1992 abomination, to use a religious term, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, going back to the Rio Earth Summit Treaty in 1992 that George H.W. Bush got us into, the daddy Bush got us into down in Rio to appear green and compassionate so that he could have a better chance against Bill Clinton. He went down to that Earth Summit in September 1992, and it didn't work. He failed. He lost it. It may have been August. It was late, right before the election in 1992.
I love how you're going to the root cause, and much of what this republicanism or conservatism has been in the past has often been just weak-willed, mincing words, never stating it. And when an animal like the left, like Democrats, see a weak little animal quivering in the corner, they're going to eat them alive. And this is what you're telling me, that Lee Zeldin, everybody can smell fear, but a vicious animal can smell it better than anybody. But you're also giving me this thought that this whole thing that Trump has done of putting people into place, that it may not be an expected choice, but it's fresh eyes, fresh perspective. This wasn't his agenda for the last 30 years. And maybe as a business person in his thinking, that's why he is so confident. What do you attribute this confidence to?
Well, first of all, people like Steve Whitekop, the negotiator in the Middle East, he was a Manhattan real estate, it's odd picks on the surface, but yet they come out and they do things maybe other people would never have been able to accomplish. I think it was Bill O'Reilly who actually said some interesting things in this, because he had some conversations with Trump. Trump is picking people based on who he sees as competent, and even some people who disagree with him on things. And he's treating it as though this is a head. This is a corporate structure. You're the man. You're going to fulfill my agenda. Even if you don't 100% agree with that, I want you to step into that role and do it. And I think that's what his cabinet has been masterfully doing. And even if it's not your background, this is what I need you to do. I need you to step up. This is your new assignment. This is what you're going to do. And I think a lot of this is because he's the outsider. And even this TV career, again, I come from the world of communication. I was a director of communication. I was a speechwriter. I'm a media guy. And I think Trump is a media guy. He's a TV guy. He's a reality TV star. That is a powerful way to be a commander in chief and a governor or a CEO, because you know what you want done and you can cut through all the BS. And it's amazing. Now, the one area where I'd say he's got to work harder on is maybe on ending the war, dealing with Putin. But I think even Putin surprised Trump. Maybe he thought maybe he wasn't prepared for that. I'm just saying there's some areas where Trump's negotiations still haven't borne fruit. We'll see as we go forward. And areas like that. It's funny, even the way he talks about that. He'll say, "Oh, I had a great meeting with Putin. It was this."
He loves people. He loves people.
Now, like, didn't you see the news? They just bombed. He's like, "What?" Now he's even very funny when he talks about his failures. Like,
yeah, I'm worried about the Department of Agriculture and what they've put forward on immigration and amnesty-like language. So not happy with that. Let's get back, though, to climate change and Lee Zeldin. What when you were frozen up there for a moment, we're not going to redo it because it was so perfect that we're going to stick with what you were starting to say right as this transition took place. And that was in the first Trump administration. You started right there. In the first Trump administration, I think you were just probably going to just draw a comparison. So maybe your point is finished on that, or I don't know.
It's in the first Trump administration, they were just very tepid. They accepted the boxed-in rules of the establishment of the global warming industrial complex. Trump still sent a delegation every year to the UN conference. In fact, I go every year. I'm going to Belém, Brazil in November. By the way, this is the first time in my lifetime, I don't want to be off, but I think it's 22 out of 24 UN summits since 2002 that I've been attending. This will be the first one. There's no U.S. delegation as of right now. So I'm thinking of appointing the informal U.S. delegation if the Trump administration, with a wink and a nod. But this would be huge because this is what they've needed to do all along, not even give it credence. Now, the media has turned this into Trump administration not sending delegation. China is going to be the world leader on climate now. We're ceding control of the climate. You know what? If China wants to rule you're welcome to it. Take it, China. Take it. They've already faced that agenda. There's no reason China wouldn't want to take over because it all goes back to Trump. Was it the 2012 tweet or 13? Global warming was invented to basically give China a monopoly control for the world economic powerhouse. And it's exactly what on every front. So
it's amazing how far back Trump's understanding is. People, especially the left, didn't take him seriously. But when you go back and see the clips and quotes from him decades ago, you think, wait a minute.
Oprah Winfrey interview. He was America First, Donald Trump. That was in the 90s. I mean, you go back in the 80s. I mean, it's amazing. He's incredibly consistent on these issues. He really has been. So back to just to finish on Lee Zeldin. So he's taken unbelievable just action after action, even stuff that other EPA wouldn't even think of, like stop-start technology. He'll spend like a day or two.
What is stop-start technology?
If a lot of people don't know what that is, if you don't have a car, I don't have a car with it because I have a 2017 and I have a manual transmission. I drive a stick-shift Jeep. But it's a technology that the Obama administration incentivized automakers to do so that when you in a car, in order for a cheap accounting trick to show higher gas miles per gallon so you can meet the corporate average fuel economy standards, you're going to implement this technology called stop start. So it's a hot day, you're driving your car, you stop at a light and the engine cuts off, but your radio stays on, your air conditioner stays on, or if it's in the winter, your heater stays on. The engine's done, it's off. You can stay off for a minute until you take your foot off the gas and hit the brake and hit the gas pedal, then it immediately starts back up again. That stoppage of 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute is allegedly saving all this gas, and it makes cars meet it. And so they incentivize this for automakers to install. It's routinely hated by people who have this in their cars. A lot of American cars have it, some foreign cars, mostly the newer cars that have it. Certain lines have it. If it's a gas guzzler.
Does it cost us money, and does it accomplish anything?
No, well, it costs money, yes. It makes the car overall more expensive. It's not like an option you can pick or choose, though. It's included so that they can get their fleet average down for these accounting tricks. And this was pushed by the Obama EPA. This wasn't even overturned by Trump's first term. So what they're doing is they're getting rid of all the incentive for that. And there's actually ways now people can, they should make that legal. That'd be like the next step. There's ways you can bypass your car's computer to get rid of this technology. I've talked to technicians. I've talked to, former GM employees. Basically, you're killing your car's starter by off-starting it, and you're hurting your engine by starting and stopping it all the time. It's like
I'm
a light
not a
switch.
mechanic, but that was the first thing I was thinking. Wait a minute, this can't be good for the machine.
Yes.
Hey,
Good because you're saving the planet. You're
on
improving
an accounting, a line of accounting. That's where you're saving it. Just it's all smoke and mirrors. Well, I dived into a real specific thing there, but what I want to get to is one, this overturning or the reconsideration, July 29, a proposed rule change. I'm not sure. Is this a rule change or is it a finding change from the 2009 endangerment finding and greenhouse gas vehicle standards proposed rule? Tell us about that briefly, and then I want to follow up with a couple of other questions about it.
This is called the endangerment finding. I was working, again, the U.S. Senate Environment Public Works Committee. This was during the Bush administration. The Supreme Court ruled that the EPA would be potentially allowed to regulate carbon dioxide under the Clean Air Act, which was a ridiculous ruling. It was very tightly split at the time. And so the Bush administration declined to do that. And then you fast forward 2 years, Obama comes in and he decides, hey, we're going to regulate CO2, basically human breath. Remember, we inhale oxygen, exhale CO2. For the first time in U.S. history, we were going to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Now, the Clean Air Act was originally passed in 1990. Never considered carbon dioxide a pollutant. So this was the opportunity where I used to call this, when Obama was president, the Chinification of America. It's where America bypassed democracy and everything became ruled by unelected bureaucrats. Very similar to reset, very similar to what happened in COVID. Well, this really all began with President Obama's term. And what Obama decided to do was basically say, we don't need no stinking legislation from Congress. He failed to get his cap and trade bill passed, his climate bill. Why did Obama fail? Was it those mean Republicans? No, it was a guy named Harry Reid. It was a guy named Al Franken of Minnesota. It was a whole bunch of Rust Belt Democrats in Ohio and Michigan who told Obama, we're not going to vote for that climate bill because it's going to decimate the American manufacturing base and the auto industry and what's left of America that already hasn't been ceded to China. So Obama failed to pass the most sweeping climate bill in history because Democrats would not support it. That's the bottom line. That's first. So what did Obama do? He decided, I don't need any legislation. We're going to basically implement this through unelected bureaucrats, through this endangerment finding. We're going to declare carbon dioxide a danger to human health, and thus we're going to regulate it because we already have the authority as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act, which was never designed for that. So that's what they did. And every regulation that we saw since Obama, we're talking the gas-powered car bans, we're talking agricultural restrictions, we're talking gas stoves, gas appliances. You can go extend it into like going after gas pizza ovens, ceiling fans, anything that deals with emissions. All of this could be brought back to, well, we have an endangerment finding, and carbon dioxide is a pollutant where we're able to do this. So you don't need Congress. Congress never voted on it. Congress doesn't regulate this. Remember, there's a point during a Biden administration where we'd wake up every day like the Biden administration is looking now to ban gas
stoves,
dryers.
Yeah.
Like what? Wake up every day and to be some new ban by some unelected bureaucrat at the Energy Department. And a lot of this, was the basis for this, was this endangerment finding. So Trump's first term decided we're not going to touch this. It's too toxic. Can I mention a guy from the first term? You may like this, may not, but
no, go ahead.
Well, there's a guy named Will Happer who came to Trump administration, Princeton physicist, foremost expert greenhouse gas. His sole purpose was to do what was just done this week in the Trump administration, which was to author a report, the first pushback against the United Nations by any country since the first UN report in 1990 that was the basis for this whole international climate scare campaign. Will Happer was approved by Donald Trump to do this back in his first term in 2018 and 19. A man named Larry Kudlow, his economic advisor, basically slow walked it and told Trump, we can't do that now. We'll do that in the next term. We can't do that. I met Larry Kudlow at CPAC. very proud of what he did. He said that he canceled this because it was toxic. It would have hurt the president. He didn't want to challenge climate change. Basically, the idea is it would be like a Vietnam War. It's just a big quagmire. He didn't want to challenge the science. So that was why it went down. According to Larry Kudlow, he's the reason we didn't have a lot of this in the first term that would have been completely shifting the narrative. Now, even if we had that in the first term, the EPA chief probably wouldn't have backed it up. They would have tried to keep their distance. So fast forward, second term, we finally have it. Besides this endangerment finding, the same day as it was released, this was overshadowed a bit, but a team of scientists led by MIT and NASA scientists, Georgia Tech, former Obama administration, Steve Koonin, issued a new report basically saying that the entire climate scare was overblown. There's no increase in extreme weather. We're having a CO2 fertilization effect. This was done in concert with this coming out challenging this endangerment finding. And they're coming out in steps. They're coming after the automobile, the gas-powered car bans. These were all based on this endangerment finding that CO2 is a pollutant and we need to regulate. Now, Europe has gone even crazier. They had a UK government report that came out in 2019 that sought to regulate carbon dioxide as we do asbestos. That's how bonkers these people have become. Each human, we exhale 3 pounds or so of carbon dioxide per person. Now, if you're exercising, you could be 6, 7, 8 pounds of carbon dioxide. If you're a larger person with bigger lung capacity, you could be breathing out more. We've had insane NYU professors actually talk about shrinking humans to reduce our carbon footprint, about putting in growth disruptors, children to keep them from growing, interfering with their growth plates. I mean, this is Joseph Mengele type stuff that have been publicly pronounced. And this is the insanity which we've had to live under. So just to bring it full circle back to you, I have even people on my side who say, well, Zeldin, I don't know why you're saying that. He could have done more. He could have like name one EPA chief that's ever done this, and name one EPA chief that's ever had the zeal to come and just shove it all back in their face. Cult, religion, just unbelievable what he has done through both the legislation, everything Trump 1.0 done, he's done, and he's doing it now, a whole nother layer of permanence and going after it along with the narrative control. And he's enjoying it. And they are just, you can just look at what's happening. Bernie Sanders went on Joe Rogan and just thought he'd say, oh yeah, they're reversing on the climate. So Joe Rogan, who had years ago been proudly, oh, of course climate change is true. Here's the NASA website. Look, it says XYZ. Joe Rogan is like, oh yeah, that's not true. Look, they're showing temperatures now. Joe Rogan pushing back on Bernie Sanders. COVID changed everything. So that's the other thing I want to say. Is
that's a good point too. COVID was one of those unexpected blessings that come from a curse.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that COVID blessing, because all things work together for good, according to the scriptures, what we saw is his loss, because he was not prepared as he is today. His loss, the COVID transformation in people's minds about government, and so many other things that you could mention led to this new Trump administration and President Trump, a transformation. And we would not have had that if he continued that second term. So I think it was God's grace that he lost. He took what they meant for evil, he made it into good, just like Joseph.
And just the final thing I want to say about Lee Zeldin, he should really be winning awards, because what he's accomplished in just 8 months is so difficult in Washington. If you go back to Ronald Reagan's first term, he had a guy named James Watt, the Interior Secretary. This was a guy, okay, he meant very well. He was going in, he was trying to get some of the land regulations and other things, but he would stick his foot in his mouth. He didn't know how to handle the media. He was
looked dorky, but I remember everybody would make fun of him. Yeah.
Lee Zeldin has mastered the policy. He's mastered the media. He's got good instincts, and he's killing it in a way that in my lifetime, I've never seen anyone do it on these issues in particular. That's why I'm saying he should be winning free market awards. He should be winning, Great Reset rejection awards, meaning the greatest battle fighter against it. Because again, Donald Trump is great, but I mean, he is putting the rubber to the road, Lee Zeldin. So, according to his staff, Donald Trump realizes how invaluable Lee Zeldin has been. And again, I just cannot believe it. I just tell everybody, I'm private and in public, I'm blown away. And I've never even met Lee Zeldin.
I was thinking about you earlier and saying to my producer, what I really need to ask is, are you getting put out of a job? Because ultimately speaking, we all who are fighting for truth and actually living within reality and not having evil prevail, and we've been fighting this for so many decades. 100 years it's been on full steam, and we all want to be out of a job. We all want to be, and I could it's like abortion. If we could finally end this scourge of abortion, everybody would be out of that job, go on to some new thing. So are you getting pushed out of a job by Lee Zeldin?
I think he's doing a better job, Lee Zeldin, than all of us climate skeptics. I mean, I've done everything over the year. 3 books, 2 movies. I've gone to UN conferences with Donald Trump cardboard cutouts. I've shredded the agreement. I've been arrested by UN climate cops, armed, thrown out in Morocco, out into the desert, had my briefcase confiscated, all my papers. I was banned for life and then undone the ban.
Warrior.
We've done all the battles, but it's like, this is the right man in the right place with the power to actually do it. And he's doing it with the narration. So to answer your question, it is incredibly hard to ever declare victory for one simple reason. And even though everything looks so bright right now, you still have Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, you have Virginia, Richard Branson, you have the all these foundations
Google.
From Rockefeller's, the Tides to the Getty family, putting billions a year. And in the case of Bill Gates, he's buying media. He buys the Associated Press, buys PBS, gives out money not only for pharma, but for climate reporting desks. And they have all of this money. The money's going to academia. They're funding block the sun, geoengineer the climate. We're going to create the climate we want. They're funding all of the global institutions, from the World Economic Forum to the World Health. The second funder, the largest single funder with all the groups of the World Health, is Bill Gates himself. What is the World Health's main goal now? Climate change is an existential public health threat. So we still have the World Health Organization. We still have the United Nations. We still have the World Economic Forum. You have the billionaire foundations. You have the corporate media. You have all of academia. And that is what we're still fighting. And they can morph incredibly. Like growing up, it was global cooling for me. Then the 80s became the rain, save the Amazon rainforest, species extinction. Climate change really was unique in that overpopulation was a big one too back in the 70s. Climate change was unique because they basically said, we're going to go all in. And so they basically said, oh, climate change is going to end up killing all these people. It's like, well, wait a minute, isn't that what you wanted? Isn't that a good thing?
But it's just an instrument. Exactly. I've never understood that, because you want us all dead, but it's really about, it is a religious part of the pantheon of cults, like multiculturalism is a cult religion. And so they all embrace parts or all of the same ideologies, and it's really that manifests itself religiously, and it's really being against God. And that will not end until the end of this age. So, you got a job.
Yes. I mean, I was just saying, it's so difficult because they're always morphing, and they have the money. They have the international global structures. We haven't taken that over. I hear there's word that CBS News could end up having a conservative bias if the merger goes through. I don't know. I remember Jesse Helms trying to buy CBS. Is it CBS? I think decades ago. Until conservatives and free marketers end up with the power structures, we just don't have that. So we're always going to be subject. And they figured out through COVID that they always have the ability to at least try again, to declare an emergency and create a dictatorship overnight. But I was going to say, on religious front, it's amazing because I've been, battling the Vatican on this. I went to the Vatican Climate Summit 2015 under then Pope Francis. I called it an unholy alliance. He brought in all these United Nations, Planned Parenthood, abortion activists, population control, brought them into the Vatican City, in the actual Vatican, and they had a climate summit. And then Pope Francis actually asked Catholics to pray for the success of a UN climate summit. And now the new Pope, unfortunately, Pope Leo just came out and said we need to pray for the conversion of climate deniers. I mean, that's basically the message he just sent.
No,
So he's
shut up. Wait.
I can find
Did I miss that something? Because
I'll follow for you. Yes. It could be something in the interpretation. Okay. Pope Leo prays for the conversion of climate change skeptics. He celebrated in a newly released mass for the care of creation, that's creation care, Earth, and urged prayers for the conversion of many people who do not recognize the urgency of caring for our common home, unquote. So he's basically saying you got to pray for people who aren't with us on this whole climate and leftist environmental agenda. The reason I can say leftist is he hasn't differentiated himself from Pope Francis' agenda yet. In fact, there's talk that he might be doing his own environmental encyclical. But it's not just
so
him.
sad.
I was at the UN climate, not just the Catholic Church, I was at the UN climate summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, which we dubbed Sharm el-Shakedown. The great Mark Stein actually dubbed it that. It was great. A lot of fun. I did it. I was doing daily reports from the summit for Mark Stein's old Great Britain TV show. But anyway, they had Mount Sinai, of course, being in Egypt, and they had a climate event at Mount Sinai, a religious event where they had the 10 climate commandments, and they did a whole mockery of Christianity. But it wasn't just a mockery because it included a rabbi, a Christian reverend, and I think a Muslim cleric. They brought in all the three faiths, and they had several events like that. I've been to New York City climate marches where they've had the climate deep earth prayer sessions where you're not even allowed media. You could watch solemnly as they pray to the earth, the whole Mother Gaia earth worship. So it is very deep
we need to pray for Mark that he holds on to the armor of God that you carry with you and Lee Zeldin as you fight these demonic forces, because that is so disgusting. And I'm sad about this Pope, because I was hoping for Catholics that
he's a lot better. And I think hopefully these are rough edges. And I don't think he's spending a lot of time on this, but he is not.
Yeah, that was creepy. No offense to Catholics, but that was creepy to be praying for climate deniers, which means he's praying for me because I deny it entirely.
Yeah.
The whole thing.
Prayers for the conversion of people who don't recognize.
Why would a Pope or why would any Christian want any kind of conversion other than to the one true God? I mean, I think that
people. That's the whole point.
Stay in your lane. Stay in your lane. This is where this polytheistic, pagan, demonic, these cults, as described above, are all. They are. It is a sweeping satanic delusion that the world has been under. Let me ask you a question about that. I know, of course, with overpopulation, that goes back much further than the climate.
1960s.
It was the 60s, because I remember overpopulation when I was in junior high school and high school, overpopulation being, the great threat. We were all going to die. And then global freezing, the next great ice age, and we were all to prepare for something like 80% of humanity dying, right?
Yes.
What do you remember? What was it? What prompted the climate to be the foremost cult that we would say transform the world from God's order to?
Yes, I did deep research on this for my Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, which was 2018 book, and it was it's the ultimate coffee table book, as a Seinfeld reference to Kramer's book on climate change. So if you go back, first of all, climate, they've always talked on some level, they've referenced climate. And I go back, I was able to find 1864, Abraham Lincoln as president. An academic named George Marsh Perkins warned of climatic excess unless mankind changed his evil ways. And that was 1864. Abraham Lincoln was president. They started this tipping point. So AOC was not unique. So what happened was, in the 1960s, Paul Ehrlich's book, Population Bomb, came out. Yeah. And that scared everyone. He was on Johnny Carson. I don't remember the number, but I think it was dozens of times, may have been like 50 times over the 70s and 80s. Not because Carson believed it, but he was good TV, because he just scared basically scared the bejeebers out of everyone.
Right.
He would talk about famines and death. And he became a big climate alarmist as well. So that was the huge scare back then. And actually, a person who deserves credit is John Lennon, the ex-Beatle. He was on Dick Cavett in 1971, and this was the height of the craze of the overpopulation. They were asking him about it, and Dick Cavett, of course, was all into the establishment. This is what the establishment, I'm parroting the establishment. This is what I'm supposed to say. And John Lennon actually says, I don't believe a word of it. Now, these things will sort themselves out. There's no population problem. And Dick Cavett's like, you don't care that all the experts are wrong? He's like, no, I don't care at all. But I was like, kudos to John Lennon. I have that clip on my website. And
that is fun. That is really fun. I like that. So it goes back to 1800s. I think it's so spiritual. But I want your book. I don't have that particular book of yours, but it goes back to population bomb, because that's when. We have mass media. Then it's the 70s. You know, we have to remember that in the 40s, this kind of stuff couldn't spread. But we have the communication networks to infect the entire world with whatever agenda is being put forth.
It is, yes. And if you go back, so to answer your direct question of when it became sort of this cultish international cause celeb, essentially, the late 70s, you can, and I actually cite and unearth these old New York Times mainstream media articles about climatologists, which was a new field, battling meteorologists over whether we were going to a cooling or a warming period, and whether, that's where you could see the battle. And they were actually reporting it at the time before everything basically. Then Al Gore starts having a hearing like 1984, I think, with Carl Sagan. They were just talking loosely about the greenhouse effect. And there was some, starting setting the stage. All the world breaks loose 1988. That's when James Hansen, the NASA scientist, goes and grandstands on in the U.S. Senate, does a hearing where he basically says it's the hottest year, climate's the greatest threat. The UN climate panel forms the same year, and that is the key phrase there, the UN climate panel, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Their whole mission is to look at how mankind influences the climate and how they can solve it. So they get to become a self-serving lobbying organization. They get to say how bad the problem is, and they get to be in charge of solving them. Isn't that a great job? They have no incentive to ever say it's not a problem, because then they lose the position of saying how they're going to solve it.
Have you ever thought about something that if you added up all of the billions, perhaps trillions, spent on these hoaxes and scams and false ideologies, if just America, let the world destroy itself and destroy their own economies. But in America, we have taken a legacy. It's like receiving your inheritance from your parents and say that it was a significant inheritance. And like all of these, wealthy, born with a silver spoon in the mouth kind of heiresses and heirs, they just spend through the money profitably, and then they're left with nothing. And what I see sometimes when I think about budgets and these crazy things that we've spent so much money for, where would we be if it weren't for, say, climate science, that hoax, that scam? How many hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions of dollars have we wasted in time and money?
It's okay. Just the endangerment finding alone, just to answer your question point blank, they're saying this could save $1 trillion, and it's $54 billion per year. I think whatever that would be, 54 times whatever to equal $1 trillion. That's just in the time scope of the latest White House
20 years,
estimate.
yeah.
And if you go back to the 90s when this really began, the first UN, they formed the panel in 88. 1990 was the first UN report. By the way, the first UN report showed the medieval warm period much warmer than today. And when I was working in the Senate, we had scientists come in and testify that in the 90s, after that report, they're like, other UN scientists had a whole chain of emails going around saying, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. And so they ended up getting rid of it. They went back. It's kind of like an
because
accounting.
It's all about the science. It's all about the science.
Say you're an accounting firm, you're accused of fraud. It's like, well, wait a minute. I hired a new accountant. We redid all the old books. Everything's A-okay now. And that's what they did. They just redid all the temperature data. Anyway, so to answer the question, everything from the 90s became punishing, low flow toilets, this was based on. Banning of the incandescent light bulbs, the destruction of the American manufacturing base. Okay, this is the topic probably for another day, but this is where I could gently critique Ronald Reagan. And I think if you follow me on this, and even someone like Milton Friedman, in the 1980s, climate change was primed in the 90s to coincide with what corporate America was ready to do, which was what? Look back at the GE with Jack Welch, openly talked overly about short-term profits for the shareholders by what? By offshoring, by getting rid of expensive American workers. You can go back and see all these quotes from him. And I think it was Vivek Ramaswamy who laid it out and said it, while Ronald Reagan was fighting the battle of big government, we ended up, we were protecting the castle from big government. The corporate government collusion that came in behind the scenes ended up being very dangerous. And so what ended up happening is all of these corporations love the concept of climate change and then a concept of NAFTA and free trade because it meant they could just hollow out America and start going offshore and start increase their profits. Sound a little bit like Bernie Sanders there.
No, you know what? I'm making an appointment with you. I want, if there's no way that we can treat what you just said.
I don't even know why I brought it up, but I was just saying that.
No. Listen. No. You're getting the wrong message from what I'm saying. This is my issue. I want to talk. I want to know about Jack Welch. I want to know about your analysis of the synthesis of why they wanted to embrace these things, because that gives me sort of a genesis in a history that would put so much in context. Because when I say offshoring is offshoring and work visas in America and citizenship, naturalization of citizenship, I've been saying for some time that all of those policies are being determined by the Fortune 500 American multinational corporations.
ExxonMobil used to be an American company. They brag that they're not an American company anymore.
Yeah, so and universities are bragging that they're not American universities anymore. So my point is, I would love to come back and have you have the time, because we've already gone 45. I'd like to have the time to really explore that. Would you do that?
Yes, I would. Can I give you one teaser, though? Edward Nixon, Richard Nixon's brother. I was on Laura Ingraham, and I actually presented all this evidence on her show. This is about a month ago now. Rare earth mining, 30 years ago, the U.S. was 90% of its own mine, rare earth mine, catalytic converters, all the precious metals, lanthanides, everything else. 30 years on, 70 to 90% of the rare earths all come from China. How did that happen? Richard Nixon normalized relations with China, and what is it, I don't want to get it wrong, 1973, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I think it was 73 or 72.
Think back when he would do that, his brother was there, a lot of cabinet members, they made a lot of Chinese contacts. Fast forward to later in the 70s and into the 80s and in the 90s, and you have these rare earth mining firms in the United States, which later became Molycorp. They were basically told, well, our environmentalists, because Richard Nixon started the EPA, by the way, the environmental regulations were so strict for this mining in the United States that they were told, hey, we can still mine, but let's send out the mine now for processing to China. They don't have the environmental regulations that we do. And it was Edward Nixon, Richard Nixon's brother, who went to the CEO of this company and started this. And this is how China then started taking over U.S. mining, the processing, and eventually the extraction, to where now they're providing 70, 90% of the rare earth mining. And we're beholden to them. And they're now threatening even the Trump administration. And we're pretty helpless in some ways at the moment. We're going to start restricting things. And you get chip shortages and everything else. I mean, it's unbelievable. But it was all done as a basis of, hey, you can bypass all these regulations, increase your profit by outsourcing to China. And this was a president of the United States brother pushing this to rare earth mining. And I was been to the Molycorp mine in the 90s. And they basically were shut down because of an endangered desert tortoise, which wasn't actually endangered. It was actually regionally endangered, and any species is endangered at the edge of their habitat. But because they found it, they ended up stopping all production at the rare earth mining.
I remember that.
29 federal agencies, state, local, and government agencies descended on them. They had tortoise sensitivity training for the workers. They had to to stop work if you saw a turtle. You had to learn how to
don't offend the turtles, feelings.
They were heavily regulated. Chinese competition was Baotu Rare Earth. We went and interviewed the spokesman for that, and he laughs on camera. And this is the footage I was given to Laura Ingram. We have him laughing on camera, saying, "Oh, China doesn't have those." Sorry, I was doing a Chinese imitation there.
That's right.
Those regulations, we don't have those environmental regulations. In other words, we can do it, and that's what ended up happening. And so that just gives you a snippet, and then add to clothing manufacturing, plastics manufacturing, industrial manufacturing, everything you can, and that's where it happened. I'm just giving you one snapshot. And this went along. And I'm not saying shame on Ronald Reagan, but it was that era that created this whole rise of the corporate powers, which then were looking for the profit, and the climate agenda, environmental regulation came with it. It was like a perfect marriage. Then they married themselves with the free trade, which then further hollowed. It was a perfect storm. And this is the America. And I don't, I will be honest, I don't know that Trump there's not much that we can do. And I got to tell you, one area I'm not happy with Trump on, that I'm just not, let me rephrase it, I'm not a cheerleader on, is the AI investments. I'm not excited that the Department of Defense has given Elon Musk, Microsoft, and other big tech billionaires and oligarchs all this money to build more AI data centers so we can lead the world. Are we really leading the world? Are these really American companies? And is this going to end up just being a surveillance state? So I'm not a huge guy that's all excited about AI.
Well, what bothers me, if I go down that road, forget it. I'm not going to go down that road. Let me...
We're way off subject here. I'm sorry about all.
But no, because I'm so glad you brought up the Nixon rare earth thing. That really has my ire up. You're coming back, Mark. We're going to talk about Jack Welch, and all. He was such a hero to everybody. And
let me say one thing. I tried to interrupt. One last thing. Be careful with the word capitalism. People say, "Oh, aren't you? You're not for capitalism." It's like Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. They called him a capitalist. Bill Gates is a capitalist. They're more oligarchs, but these terms don't mean as much anymore. I'm for free markets, and I'm for freedom and free exchange, but you got to be careful, because what we've had the last, particularly the last 15, 20 years is not capitalism as we used to define. It's
I agree with you, because the word conservatism means almost nothing anymore as well. And my husband gave a speech 15 years ago, why I'm not a conservative, and everybody was shocked because it means nothing. And conserve what? Conserve what at this point? Well, what I want to know is, Lee Zeldin, you've given us, a lot to be hopeful for with Lee Zeldin's agenda. And I'm just sort of looking at what he can do to make these advances permanent. And the question that I had, and you started answering it perhaps before I even got to the question, is this. If he overturns, or through regulatory processes, overturns that finding, the endangerment finding that CO2 is a pollutant, which led to everything. It was like the kid in a candy store. After that, you could do anything you want to because of the endangerment finding.
Bypassing democracy, that's the key. You don't need a vote of Congress to do any of this.
Exactly. And that was insane, because essentially what it looks like is he couldn't get what he wanted out of Congress, Obama. And so by passing that bill, because they refused to, because they saw it for what it was, I'm assuming, then he proposed this rule that even more expansively, because there's no guardrails whatsoever, is not a bill. It's just states a finding, and then go environmental activists, go, maniacs. So my question is, shouldn't they come out with a finding that reviews, and you mentioned some documents, so you can maybe touch on that, a finding that exposes the false science, so-called, that we have been operating under, the billions of dollars plus that we have spent, and have a new, and sort of like a new doctrine, that's the wrong word when it's scientific, but a new way or paradigm to look at environmental issues and have it sort of lay out the future for the next 20 years. And then they can't go and just put back the old thing that's been taken out, the endangerment finding, but now they would have to go and argue against this huge finding that the Trump administration and Lee Zeldin put in that sets us on the right path.
Yes. And so it's putting huge hurdles, and so they just can't undo what Trump has done. And in concert with it, as I mentioned, they have this new report out, which you could call it the consensus busting report by a team of scientists. And stuff like they go through the weather. I'm reading actual quotes. Hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, droughts. No increase on U.S. data or global data. U.S. tide gauge measurements, sea level, no obvious acceleration in sea level rise behind the typical historical average. In other words, sea level has been rising for the last 10,000 years since the end of the Ice Age. So the fact that sea level is rising is not out of the ordinary.
It's not news.
People say anything. Yeah, but they'll turn it into scary. Florida's underwater. Solar activity is underestimated. Then I love this stuff. Extremely aggressive climate policies are proving more detrimental than beneficial. Even if the U.S. zeroed out all our emissions, as John Kerry has admitted this, there's no impact on global, on potentially on the climate whatsoever. And we're the historic largest emitter of carbon dioxide. So they go through CO2 is greening the earth. CO2 is increasing photosynthesis. Ocean life is thriving. It's not acidic oceans. Wildfires are not more common. Heat wave activity reached a peak in the 1930s. How many people are going to tell you that? That even Biden's EPA charts show that heat waves in the 1930s were 5, 7, 8 times more intense and hotter than anything we're experiencing today, the last couple of decades. And that was the era of the Dust Bowl. John Steinbeck wrote about it. So there is now a report that's the first U.S. government report of any nation pushing back on the U.S. It's this new Energy Department report. But frankly, there's so much news going on, it just got lost in the shuffle. But it will continue to grow in importance because this will be the basis by which to overturn this endangerment finding. And remember, the other thing I was trying to say is, in order for this permanence agenda, we've got to get out of the UN Rio Earth Summit, the Framework Convention on Climate Change that George H.W. Bush got us into in 1992 when he was just trying to be green, so he would, hope that Bill Clinton, I'll appease the environmentalists and they'll vote for me and I'll beat Bill Clinton. Wasn't going to happen. And he got us into, so that's why we've had 30 United Nations climate.
Why is it Republicans are the ones? Well, because it's a totally different party. It's a total.
It is. You want to expose a Republican, find a never Trumper who said, I can't believe Donald Trump. How can we have it? It's like, let's look at climate, energy, environment. You look at George W. Bush, you look at Mitt Romney, John McCain. Every Republican nominee has sucked. Sorry, from my bad English.
No,
has sucked on this issue. Mitt Romney had Obama's staff before he had Obama's staff working on climate as governor of Massachusetts. John McCain was co-sponsoring climate bills. George W. Bush funded, supported the whole UN goals, but eventually kept us out of it. But so did Bill Clinton, and so did Obama. Kept us out, of those treaties until 2016, 2015, when we signed the UN Paris Agreement. But all the Republicans were into this. Donald Trump was the first Republican.
Are they just idiots? They're so afraid that they're not scientists, so they just get some people around them and they can't use common sense and they don't think enough about it and explore it on their own. Because sometimes you have to actually read books, reports, and you have to do it yourself, because if you're just listening to who's the last guy in front of you, you can believe anything if they have a PhD behind their name.
Yeah, and they don't. Ultimately, this is the establishment Republican Party. They never wanted to be. They never wanted to be challenge the consensus. They never wanted to be offend. They wanted to be involved in polite society. They didn't want to be impolite, and that's really a huge part of it. There was a guy named I want to say Ron, who used to write about environmentalism. He would talk about the corporate capture. Like a lot of times, it was just CEOs and their wives who wanted to fit in the social scene in a lot of these big blue cities, and they would go along. That's how you got the DEI. Yes, how you got transgenders. How you got Black Lives Matter. How you got the climate agenda. All of that. And by the way, that's a whole nother subset. Is how they, even to this day, you go to United Airlines. Do you want to set your flight, or even Amazon? You could have a 2-day delay in shipping for a sustainability certificate or whatever they do. All in that corporate claptrap
But, God never tells us to be nice or polite necessarily. He wants us to be good, righteous, and true, uh, polite and fitting into society and not ever pushing back and wanting everything to be, um, there's no controversy. That's just playing right into the hands of evil. Because if you're afraid of being called rude or irritating or obnoxious or not nice, then you have no business being in politics or religion. Yeah,
And that's like Trump, no one would have ever thought to make a mold like him, but he's really been quite remarkable in so many different respects. The guy,
he's
the 2.0, he doesn't care what go ahead, try to jail him. I mean,
he can
can't-
he can make
nothing-
some mistakes, but
nothing.
his boldness and his willingness to make mistakes and his willingness to break the molds and to change the narratives and all that, that's worth its weight in gold. Let me ask you this as we kind of bring it to a close. As we move forward, we're in good hands, clearly. I'm so happy. When I first thought about Lee Zeldin, I was like you. I was thinking, what did I not know about Lee Zeldin? How did he get picked for this job? But so now I understand a little bit more. It wasn't a background. It was really just, I don't know, the president saw something in him. But going forward, we're on the right track. We've got the right man in the job. Hopefully the team is as well. What do we have to be looking for? What do we have to worry about? I don't want to worry, but I mean, what we should be looking for? Or are there any worries, true worries, until the next presidential election? What?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to look at beyond Trump, and you have to look at all the other potential candidates. I liked Vivek Ramaswamy until he, the H1, was it HB1?
H1B.
He sounded very Indian caste system all of a sudden, like an
Very
upper
much.
class. Yeah,
It's a problem.
even JD Vance scares me because a few years back he was, talking about climate and solar and wind and a lot of recent conversions. I'm old enough to remember my brother worked in the Reagan administration. I used to go on Saturdays, 1980. I was 13 years old I was 12 and I can't remember. I was 12 years old. Going and I had the Reagan autograph signing pen and I would get audio tracks of Reagan. I think they were 8-track or reel to reel and send them out to local radio stations. The 1980 campaign. I remembered a lot of people I thought were conservative. My warning is this. I remember a lot of people I thought were Reagan conservatives, Howard Baker, George H.W. Bush, even Bob Dole.
We were so naive in those days.
Yeah, but I think there's a lot of that now. I'm warning people now. A lot of these people they think they're MAGA. They're MAGA because they're raising money and they're popular. But what happens when MAGA, Trump's gone and there's tough times and people are organized against you? Are they going to stand strong, or is it going to be similar to what happened to Reagan and all these Reagan supporters in the 80s who became centrist liberal Republicans, the little Schweikers
I'm
and others?
really glad you brought this up in this way because I'm a JD Vance man, right? I really want JD to be who I want him to be.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
I don't like his funding. I don't like that Peter Thiel. I don't like that he's a product of a billionaire. That just turns me off immediately. Yeah, but I'm wary of him is what I'm getting at.
We are working on, at WorldNetDaily, we're breaking stories, a huge special report that's going to be coming out, massive. I wanted to call it the India lobby, but it's going to be on like the outsourced nation, how we have literally over the past 25 years put ourselves in the position of having India, believe it or not, and corporate giants determine our immigration, naturalization, citizenship, and outsourcing. I mean, that is power in these two agendas. And frankly, I'm seeing that there are people within the administration that are very much concerned behind the scenes. And I think big things are going to be happening about this very issue. If we actually It looks like we're going to win on the environment. I know I'm not saying that we will never have to look at it again.
In closing, I should say that we can now get back to real environmental issues like East Palestine, lead in drinking water, toxic waste cleanup. One of the left-wing scientists who became a skeptic was named Dennis Rancourt.